Hey there, it's Lara back with your horoscopes for the full moon in Aquarius, which takes place on August 11th, 2022. Thanks for being here. So these horoscopes are good for the whole, in this case, the whole waning phase of the moon cycle, so the next 2 weeks. And I'll be back to talk about the new moon in Virgo, which happens on August 27th before then. But beyond that, there's something going on in relation to this full moon and in relation to the new moon in Leo that we had a couple of weeks ago, which I spoke about back then. You can go watch that video if you want, if you missed it. But that is sort of flavoring the whole remainder of this year. And in fact, it's been sort of flavoring life for us for a while. And I'm going to talk about that in more detail in this video. And of course, after the intro, I'll get into the horoscopes for all 12 signs. So definitely stick around for that. I am endeavoring to do these videos with very few notes these days. And also, I always say this to try to keep them a little bit shorter, but inevitably there's so much to say. But the thing is, I have taken on a new contract with a local nonprofit organization. And so my time is more limited than ever. So I love to do these videos. I want to offer this to you. And you can check out what else I offer over on my website, astrologymaven.com. If you do happen to order a reading, just be mindful that it may take me a little longer than usual right now to get that sorted for you. So anyways, let's dive into it, shall we? Enough about all of that. So this Aquarius full moon is happening on August 11th, and it is at, I have my my handy dandy little almanac here. It is at 9:35 p.m. Eastern. So you can adjust accordingly. I'm in the Eastern time zone. That's what I use. And it's at 19 degrees of the fixed air sign of Aquarius. So beyond that, it is in a conjunction with Saturn, who's at 22 Aquarius at the time of this full moon. And as we know, with all full moons, we've got the sun and the moon across the sky from each other, right? So in this case, the moon is in Aquarius and the sun is across the sky in Leo because it's still Leo season at the time of this full moon. So a couple of weeks ago, we had the new moon in Leo, and whatever was conceived of at that point, we're reaching a culmination of that in some way, shape, or form at the full moon. So it may just be something very minor in some cases. It may just be like finishing up like the sort of the first steps, or it may be a bigger culmination, if it was some sort of a shorter project or something along those lines, or some initiation of sorts that went on around the time of the Leo new moon. We're seeing that come to light now, come to fruition, culminate, bear fruit. Maybe something emotional is rising to the surface that's related to whatever that was a couple of weeks ago. And again, I encourage you to go back and watch the Leo new moon horoscopes if you haven't done that yet. And I'll pop a link below. So we've got the full moon, like I said, sun and the moon opposite each other. And at a full moon, like I was saying, culminations and those sorts of things happen. And we tend to get this sort of, these opposing forces, or you can think of it as, opposite sides of the same coin, or two energies, the yin and the yang, right? Of the lunar and the solar kind of, the lunar and solar vibes, so to speak, are facing off, right? They are like witnessing each other like head on, and some sort of perhaps compromise needs to be reached, or, a witnessing. And at full moons, we often have, issues around relationships that come up. You know, it's sort of a relational energy in general. Or we have things that have been kind of stuffed down, buried, you know, under the surface, that come up to be released or witnessed or illuminated, right? At a full moon, we have the moon fully reflecting the light of the sun. So things come to light at full moons. Now, like I said to you, aside from that, you know, the sun and the moon opposite each other, we've got Saturn in a very close conversation with the moon at this time in Aquarius. And not only do we have Saturn in a conjunction with the moon, we have the sun. And so we've got Uranus in Taurus in a square with the sun and the moon. So Uranus, Taurus, and Aquarius all make hard angles to each other. So does Scorpio. Those are the 4 fixed signs, and the fixed signs square each other, right? So they make these hard angles, and squares are conversations of tension. They are of the nature of Mars, where we can have inflammation, some kind of agitation or aggression, even just this tension that needs to be resolved. And usually the way that tension is resolved is through some kind of action, right? So ideally we take action to resolve the tension. But one way or the other, the tension will be resolved because it's got to go somewhere. So we have, just flipping over to the chart, so I can look at it to talk to you about it. So we have the sun in a square with Uranus and the North Node in Taurus, and the moon also in a square. The moon and Saturn in a square with Uranus and the North Node in Taurus. We also have the sun and the moon in a square with the South Node, because the South Node is opposite the North Node, right? Always. And it's in Scorpio. And of course, we have this opposition between the moon and Saturn and the sun. So this makes for a very interesting configuration, a fixed grand cross as it's known. And you can think of it as a square with an X through the middle of it. That's kind of like everything's kind of, you know, it's almost like you get this sense that, you know, there's a pulling back on that, you know, X in the middle of the square until finally, like, it either snaps and the energy is released, or it's let go and the energy is released. It's like, it's that kind of a vibe that's going on here. And so what I want to do is just talk to you a little bit about this, how this moon is bringing up once again the themes of the Saturn-Uranus square. That was the astrological conversation and configuration. That was really the hallmark of 2021, right? But a lot of astrologers were talking about, you know, 2021 Saturn-Uranus square, and then it's over. But that's not the case, because Saturn and Uranus, because of the retrogrades, they are coming back into very close proximity to each other in the fall of this year. You know, like right now, Uranus is at 18 degrees Taurus, Saturn's at 22 degrees of Aquarius. That's not that far away by aspect. So, and we're going to feel that because Saturn's retrograde, you know, coming into a closer and closer aspect. It's not going to hit by the second sort of thing, but it's going to be pretty much exact again in October. So the story's not over yet, right? This Saturn-Uranus story, which collectively for us has been about old versus new, tradition versus innovation. structures, hierarchy, patriarchy, versus the liberation from that and the urge for freedom, rebellion, those kinds of things. And in a minute here, I'm going to read to you just two quick excerpts from Richard Tarnas's book, Cosmos and Psyche, because he does the best job of anyone of giving you a really good idea of what the planetary significations are. So I'm going to read to you, how he describes Saturn and how he describes Uranus. So you can really get a solid understanding of what these two energies are, and then think of them squaring off in that conversation of tension where something's got to give, right? Now, of course, we've been seeing this play out in the world for the last couple of years, but we've also been feeling it in our own lives. So everybody has Aquarius in their chart somewhere. Everybody has Taurus in their chart somewhere, and all the other, signs as well. So in this case, wherever you have Aquarius is where the full moon is culminating, because we have the moon conjunct Saturn. And I'm not going to lie, this can feel like serious matters are coming to a head in some way. But Saturn, the thing about Saturn is we always talk about Saturn as sort of like, the stern hand and the taskmaster, and the obstacles, and this idea of resistance and being rule bound and harsh and stern and all of these things. And while all of that is true, we also need to appreciate Saturn for its capacity to give us some solid foundation on which to stand, to build necessary, structure, to teach us about maturity and responsibility and mastery, and all of these things. And I'll get into it more when I read from Tarnas's book. But so we have this opportunity here in the house that Aquarius sits for each of us to have a culminating moment around the lessons we've been learning in relation to the house Aquarius sits for us in our chart. And of course, I'll get into that in a couple of minutes when I go through all 12 signs. Now, the other piece of the puzzle is, well, there's two other pieces of the puzzle. Of course, when we have a full moon, the energy tends to play out on an axis because the moon is across the sky from the sun. So we have the sun illuminated across the sky from the moon, and the moon is really reflecting that light, right? So there's this kind of back and forth that goes on. And in this case, we've got the sun in Leo. So this will happen on an axis in everybody's chart, the Leo Aquarius axis. And when I go through all 12 signs, I'll speak to what are the themes involved here on that axis for each of us, right? But the sun in Leo, we can think of things, the sun in Leo wants to and needs to be witnessed and appreciated. The sun in Leo can speak to things like rulership, rulers, and leadership. And the sun in Leo can be quite dramatic. It can also be playful and exuberant and benevolent. It is very good at making others feel important, but ultimately, needs to be appreciated and needs to feel important in its own right as well. And so when we've got the sun in Leo and the moon in Aquarius, we can see themes of like the individual versus the group going on here. We can see like the leaders versus the people, those kinds of themes going on. We can see things like individuals wanting to be recognized. In a group setting, or some kind of realization around the fact that we can't necessarily, do all this on our own. Meaning like a group is made up of individuals, right? And so we've been living a very long time, I think, with this, I don't know if I'm using this phrase correctly, like cult of personality. It's like our individual needs are important and our autonomy is important and all of that. And all of that is very true. But we've become perhaps a little narcissistic in some ways, right? And a little like my needs trump everybody else's needs. I'm the most important. And I think some of us, at least, some of us have always recognized this, but more people I think are starting to recognize the importance of community. And I think as we move into, the next few years, this is going to become more and more and more evident that we ultimately need to rely on each other, and that we need to help each other and support each other, and appreciate each other's differences and uniqueness, Aquarius, but and not think that we're necessarily more important than the next person, or that our needs are more important. And this idea of taking care of the collective needs means that our needs are also taken care of, right? So kind of flipping the script in a way, if you know what I mean. Okay, so I tend to ramble a bit when I don't have a lot of notes, and I hope it makes sense to you. Okay, so let me, what else do I want to say about that? Oh yeah, so just to finish that thought. So, I'm going to speak to that axis, that Leo Aquarius axis, but I'm also going to touch on, once again, and it won't be the first time, the house that Taurus sits for each of us, because we've had so much going on there, right? We have Mars in there right now still too. And we know we had Uranus and the North Node who are still in a conjunction. And Mars came and conjunct Uranus and the North Node as well, that triple conjunction that I spoke about in last video. So that's still kind of reverberating out, and we're getting another ping of this Saturn-Uranus square. So there's been a lot going on in Taurus for each of us, and around the Taurian themes, right, of resources, survival needs, food supply, money, economy, getting our basic needs met, our relationship to the earth, that sort of thing. So I will speak to the significance of all of these pieces at the time of this full moon, for each of us individually when I go through all 12 signs. So let me now hand it over to Richard Tarnas for a second. In his book, Cosmos and Psyche, he does, like I was saying, this really great descriptions of the planets. And I just have to find, okay, here, let's start with Saturn. I'm going to put my glasses on for this. So Saturn, again, is conjunct the full moon, right? So there's this quality of Saturn that is blending with the full moon in Aquarius. So here we have, this is what Richard Tarnas says about Saturn. Saturn, the principle of limit, structure, contraction, constraint, necessity, hard materiality, concrete manifestation. Time, the past, tradition, age, maturity, mortality, the endings of things, gravity and gravitas, weightiness, that which burdens, binds, challenges, fortifies, deepens, the tendency to confine and constrict, to separate, to divide and define, to cut and shorten, to negate and oppose, to strengthen and forge through tension and resistance, to rigidify, to repress, to maintain a conversation and strict authority. To maintain a conservative and strict authority, to experience difficulty, decline, deprivation, defect, and deficit, defeat, failure, loss, alienation, the labor of existence, suffering, old age, death, the weight of the past, the workings of fate, character, karma, the consequences of past action, error and guilt, punishment, retribution, imprisonment, the sense of no exit, pessimism, inferiority, inhibition, isolation, oppression, and depression. The impulse and capacity for discipline and duty, order, solitude, concentration, conciseness, thoroughness and precision, discrimination and objectivity, restraint and patience, endurance, responsibility, seriousness, authority, wisdom, the harvest of time, effort, and experience, the concern with consensus reality, factual concreteness, conventional forms and structures, foundations, boundaries, solidity and stability, security and control, rational organization, efficiency, law, right and wrong, judgment, the superego, the dark, cold, heavy, dense, dry, old, slow, distant, the senex, chronos, the stern father of the gods. So, heavy duty, right? But not all negative. There are a lot of things we can take from that that we may see at the time of this full moon, because again, this story has been playing out for some time now. And I think the idea is, if we have been doing the work of Saturn, that nose to the grindstone, patience, determination, maturity, all of those things that Richard Tarnas says, then what ultimately happens is that Saturn rewards us in the end. So we have to keep that in mind, even though there can be a real sense of seriousness, somberness, burden, these kinds of things going on around the time of this full moon. So that's the Saturn and Aquarius piece. And then I'm going to speak to Uranus and what Richard Tarnas says about Uranus. Okay. So he says quite a lot here, but this is the part I want to read. Since at least the turn of the 20th century, the unanimous consensus among astrologers is that the planet Uranus is empirically associated with the principle of change, rebellion, freedom, liberation, reform, and revolution, and the unexpected breakup of structures with sudden surprises, revelations, and awakenings, lightning-like flashes of insight, the acceleration of thoughts and events, with births and new beginnings of all kinds, and with intellectual brilliance, cultural innovation, technological invention, experiment, creativity, and originality. In addition to the occurrence of sudden breakthroughs and liberating events, Uranus transits are linked to unpredictable and disruptive changes. Hence, the planet is often referred to as the cosmic trickster. Another set of themes associated with Uranus is a concern with the celestial and the cosmic, with astronomy and astrology, with science and esoteric knowledge, and with space travel and aviation. There's another part here where he talks about, I thought I had a bookmark, I apologize, where he kind of gives a list of the characteristics of Uranus. So, okay, so here we are. That which rebels and overthrows. Freedom, unpredictability, suddenness, speed, excitement, stimulation, restlessness, experiment, brilliance, originality, individualism. And so forth, he says. So there is this, you can get the idea here, and sorry that was a little bit fumbly, but you get the idea here that there is this back and forth going on between the impulse for like breaking free or breakthroughs, if you will, and then hitting the wall, right? It's like we want the change. The change has to happen. It will happen when Uranus is involved. But Saturn is going, okay, but we still have to have some structure. We still have to like plan this, or we have to deal with the aftermath, or, those kinds of reality checks. And so there's a lot of that going on over the course of this last 2 years. And this full moon is illuminating that. We have this idea of, like, I was thinking about this in terms of, the process of birth. If anybody has ever given birth, they'll know what I'm talking about, or witnessed it, or has any idea about it. There tends to be this kind of like the contraction happens and then there's a resting, right? So this kind of like that back and forth. And that's sort of the Saturn Uranus thing that's going on here. There is a breakthrough, and then an immediate kind of tapping the brakes. There's an impulse to kind of rush forward, and then a reality check that happens. But at some point, right? Again, if you're somebody who has experienced this in your own life, you can't hold back anymore. Like, if the midwife or the doctor, tells you not to push, at some point it's like, good luck with that, because it's happening anyway, and I don't have control over it, right? And so there's that. Like, eventually the birth happens one way or the other. So, but it can be, Saturnian in nature. It can be difficult. It can be, there can be obstacles. There can be a sense of real tension, and like, it's not super fun, the process. So we're kind of in that place right now. But the good news is that we haven't had, this is not something new. Let's put it that way, right? We've been dealing with this for some time. And so we're just at another point. And I think reaching sort of the point where we're starting to understand what this has been all about and where it might be going. Although with Uranus, things are very unpredictable. So we may not have a solid grasp, right? But I think all of us are kind of getting a bit of a wake-up call in terms of, or a reality check, where it's kind of like, somebody's got to be responsible. So who's it going to be, right? Like, we can't just keep looking at the next person or the powers that be, or what have you. Like, we all have to do our part. We all have to, do some adulting, those of us who are at that phase. And I posted something, one of my favorite quotes, last night on Facebook again, and I think on Instagram, of from Stephen Jenkinson, who I can't remember the exact words, I'll paraphrase, but that I am saying to you as one adult to another in troubled times, that we have an obligation, to keep going and to keep moving forward, to be responsible, even with no assurance that about how things are going to turn out, kind of thing. So that's where we're at, so if this feels a bit heavy, that's because, it's not a light and fluffy full moon that we have here, but there is a real opportunity for breakthrough, for change that is built on a solid foundation, for maybe rebuilding even in some ways. So, okay, let me just check if I have anything else written down here that I want to talk to you about specifically. Again, when I don't have a ton of notes, then I'm kind of meandering all over whatever's coming up here. Oh, okay. So let's just lighten the mood just briefly before I dive into all 12 signs. So when I was thinking about this, and I said something about this on, I don't know, I think Facebook or something last week, but in relation to this energy, this Saturn-Uranus square, and at the time, Mars and Uranus in the North Node were in a conjunction, and it's like, it reminded me of, when I was a kid, I don't know how old, maybe 10 years old or something like that, along those lines. I had this incident where I went to public swimming with some friends of mine. And when I left, my mom, said, come home presentable for company, because we were having company. And so I was in a bit of a rush, and I didn't dry my hair before I left the pool. So I'm riding my bike home, and it was a bit of a breezy day. So I thought I was being super clever and innovative, Uranus. And so as I'm riding down the street, and it's not a busy street that we lived on, I start kind of thrashing my head back and forth, trying to dry my hair in the wind as I'm letting the breeze go through my hair on my bike, right? It was a very Uranian moment. Then I lost control of my bike. Uranus can be a bit chaotic, and slammed into a parked car. Saturn flew over the hood and smashed my teeth on the curb and broke my front tooth. So not only did I come home not presentable for company, I had to have an emergency trip to the dentist. So lesson learned, right? And I think ultimately, you laugh if you will, because it's a funny story. But you learn lessons from these scenarios where it's kind of like, oh yeah, well, this is what I'm going to do, right? Uranus. And then Saturn goes, whoa. But you might want to be a little smarter about that. You might want to slow down a little. You might want to think about this. Saturn puts the obstacles, the parked car in your way, and forces you to deal with the consequences of your chaotic actions. And so let that be a lesson to all of us, right? That's kind of where we're at, where yes, change is something that we need, and a sense of greater freedom and things like that, these Uranian impulses. But we have to also be mature and responsible in terms of how we go about getting those needs met or dealing with those impulses. So, okay. Ramble. Let's move into the horoscope for all 12 signs. And I've said a lot in the intro. I've said a lot in past videos, right, about the Saturn-Uranus square. And if you combine last week's video on the new moon in Leo with this one, you can get a real good picture of all of this. One thing I want to mention to you is that I already mentioned this is, a culmination point in relation to the new moon in Leo that happened on July 28th. But also, if you look back 6 months-ish to the February 1st new moon that happened in Aquarius, we are now at the culmination point of that. So what began back then in the world, but, more personally, we're talking here in this situation, what happened in your life? What got off the ground? What did you get the first inklings of? What new seeds were planted or conceived of back then in very early February that are now coming to this crescendo at this point? And there may be like a blossoming, a bearing fruit, things coming to light, all of those full moon things that I've said a couple of times now. So think about that. Also, I want you to know, if you have planets in the fixed signs, Aquarius, Leo, Taurus, and Scorpio, oh, my friends, you're getting it, right? Like, my husband has a stellium of planets in Scorpio. We've got a lot of that in our own house in general, this fixed energy. And so, the fixed signs are really getting a bit of a workout here. And we all have the fixed sign somewhere in our chart. So, but specifically in the case of this full moon, if you have planets, points, angles around 19 degrees of the fixed signs, give or take a few degrees on either side, so specifically Aquarius, also Leo, Scorpio, and Taurus, then you may have a bit of a more personal experience with this full moon, right? Otherwise, if you don't have anything in your chart that is in real close contact with this full moon, then you may be someone who is just witnessing events go on in other people's lives around you or in the world at large, right? Not all lunations are created equally. Not all astrological events are felt equally. It depends on how it is interacting with your own personal chart. So, and just before I dive in, on that note, if you want to know more about your chart, about how to get an accurate chart, about, the origins of astrology, I have a quick course that is on demand. So you can take it whenever you want. And you can get more information about that. It's called Birth Chart Basics, and it's over on my website. So the link to that will be below as well. Because personally, for me, as much as I like to do readings for people, what I really love most is to empower you to learn about your own chart and to be able to use that in your own life, because ultimately you know yourself best and your life best, right? And so having that information can be much more empowering than somebody else kind of telling you about it. Although that can be very validating, especially when you're first starting out. But you can do so much more if you have your own chart and you know it. Okay, let's get on with it here. We're going to start with Aquarius in this case, because I always start with the sign whose lunation it is, right? And we are talking about, first and foremost, rising sign. That's what you should listen for first if you know your rising sign. It will be the most sort of obvious, accurate, predominant. And if you don't know your rising sign, then you can definitely listen for your sun sign and your moon sign if you know them. You can listen for all three. They will give you pieces of information, but the rising sign will be the sort of the best option. Also, if you're somebody that has a lot of planets in a particular sign, so like I was saying, my husband has a stellium of planets in Scorpio, even though he's a Leo rising. So what happens in Scorpio, and I have a Scorpio moon, there's resonance there, right? So if you're somebody that has, like, I did a reading for somebody not long ago that had, if I recall correctly, I think it was a stellium in Virgo. And so I suggested that, they also pay attention to Virgo, because there's so much going on in that sign that it would likely be very notable for them as well. Okay. All right, here we go. So Aquarius, for you, this full moon is happening in your first house. It's your full moon. And there is a precipice, being reached, a culmination, a bearing of fruit, some kind of release, those kinds of things happening in relation to you, meaning your physical body, vitality, appearance, even how you come at the world, how the world perceives you. These are first house themes. The first house is where we announce ourselves to the world, right? And it impacts the trajectory of our life. So the first house has an impact on everything else in life. So it's quite important when events happen in the first house. So this is a full moon moment in your first house, but it's on the axis of relationships, because the moon is conjunct Saturn in your first house, and the sun is across the sky in the seventh house of the other. So there may be things being dealt with here around self and other, around your relationship to self, something going on in the lives of a significant other or others, in partnership in some way that impacts you, something going on in terms of even contracts and agreements is seventh house, right? So this could be like the culmination of a relationship. It could be the next step in a relationship. Saturn is maturity, right? Responsibility. There could be some mature realizations happening about the self, or you are presenting in a more mature fashion in some way, whatever that looks like maybe you're, I don't know, getting your first job, or maybe you are taking a big step in life in some way that makes you appear more mature or behave more maturely, or you're somehow there could be like even like a milestone in terms of aging going on for some folks. What else could I say about this? Definitely think back, Aquarius, to what got off the ground around the time of the new moon in your sign. So if you're an Aquarius sun, it would have been sometime around your birthday month, right? The actual new moon happened on February 1st. So what got off the ground then that is reaching the next level, or something that is needing to be dealt with now, or that is rising to the surface in some way. And then, of course, you've got Uranus in your fourth house. So that's where this impulse for freedom, liberation, change, these shock and awe moments, this sense of perhaps chaos, or innovation, or these kinds of things, breakthroughs even, are coming from, right? So there's the Uranus square to the Saturn and full moon. And Uranus in your fourth house is that impulse for change in terms of home, family, roots, place of living, ancestry, sense of emotional security, parents, parenting, that kind of thing. So again, there's this kind of, I'm hesitating to use like expansion versus contraction going on, because when I use the word expansion, I think more of Jupiter. And in this case, we're talking about Uranus, which is like a lightning bolt, right? Rather than like a balloon expanding like Jupiter. Uranus is like a sudden expansion or breakthrough. And then in the fourth house, and then hitting that wall of Saturn in the first house in your case. So those are some things to contemplate for you, Aquarius, along with everything I said in the introduction. And I'm going to move on to Capricorn now. Capricorn, for you, you've got the full moon culminating in your second house of your personal resources. So your finances, what you value and place worth on, material possessions, even time and energy are resources, personal resources, right? The second house is like our basic needs in many ways, our sense of self-worth. So that's where the moon and Saturn are in a conjunction at the time of this full moon. So there may be some kind of somber, serious realizations or the culmination of some difficult journey that's been going on in that second house in relation to those themes. And this is somehow related to your eighth house because the sun is in Leo in the eighth house across the sky of other people's resources, other people's money, time, energy, your entanglements with other people, the things that happen in life that we may feel a little bit fearful of, or we feel like we are not in control of, our intimate connections, our psychological wounds, or those, like I said, shared resources, things like debts, taxes, insurance, loans, mortgages, etc., inheritance, that sort of thing, or even partners' income can be implicated here. And so something going on this axis of resources is also the axis of like material form versus transformation, right? The eighth house is where we can experience that profound sense of death and rebirth in some way. So that's like the full moon culmination is in the second house. So reaching some kind of a milestone or a release point or some emotional event, turning point in the second house of resources. And then we've got Uranus in your fifth house in Taurus, and that is the shock and awe factor, the surprises, the innovation, the need for freedom and breakthrough, the rebellion going on in the house that speaks to children and things surrounding children, fun and pleasure, how you have fun in life, your creative self-expression, things like hobbies, special interests, that sort of thing, romance even falls into this category. So those kinds of things, right? There's been some breakthroughs or that impulse for breaking free or liberating, or rebelling in that area of life. And then that's been met with some blockages and some restrictions and some need for maturity and mastery and all of that on that resource axis. So, I mean, very clearly what I think of when I think of this is like, you want to have fun. These are some scenarios. You want to do something creative and pleasurable or enjoyable, but resources are a factor. Or you're having to work extra hard in order for those things to happen. Or kids are rebelling, and it may be taxing resources in some way. That kind of thing can be going on. So I think I'm going to leave that there for you, Capricorn, because that's what you need to know. Think about how this applies to your own life. Think about what got off the ground, or what was transpiring a couple of weeks ago at the Leo new moon, but also 6 months ago at the February 1st Aquarius new moon, and how that relates to what's culminating now for you. So I will leave that there, and I'm going to move to Sagittarius now, where Sagittarius, you have this full moon in Aquarius in your third house, a culmination, a bearing of fruit, an illumination of sorts, a release in relation to your daily rituals, that are meaningful to you, the things going on in your immediate environment, the people in your immediate environment. This, the third house is a busy place. It covers things like communication, siblings, people who feel like siblings, peers, community members, the the day-to-day things you do, again, that have meaning. Education, what else? Commerce, short distance travel. So all of these things that we do and people we encounter on the day-to-day, right? That make meaning in our lives in some way. So we've got this full moon culminating there. And so there can be a sense of seriousness about this, hard work, obstacles, restrictions, all those Saturnian words that I talked about in the intro. And it's on this axis of the 3rd and 9th house, which is the axis of the mind. We've got the sun over in Leo in your 9th house of expanding your horizons, the things that are far away or far from home, people in places that at a distance, your worldview and your, like even things like philosophy, political leanings, religion, justice matters. What else? I don't know if I said travel already, long distance travel, publishing, speaking, you know, the quest that we're on, sort of thing. So this is the axis being lit up at the Aquarius full moon for you. And think about what transpired a couple of weeks ago at the new moon in Leo. In some way, shape, or form, that's reaching a turning point or a culmination now. But think about 6 months ago at the Aquarius new moon, February 1st, 2022. Around that time, what was transpiring in that 3rd house in relation to those 3rd house themes that I just mentioned? And it's now reaching, again, like a leveling up, a culmination, a blossoming, a realization of sorts, you know, and it may be, again, flavored by Saturn in some way. And then you've got that square to Uranus in the 6th house that's been ongoing, and we're having another hit of it. So where there are surprises, shock and awe, need for liberation, freedom, breakthroughs, innovation in your 6th house of the daily grind, what you do on the day-to-day work, whether it be paid or unpaid, sacrifices, right? How you are in service, issues around illness and health, issues around pets, if that's pertinent to you, these kinds of things. And so there's an impulse to kind of break free there, or to innovate, or there could be some, like I said, surprises, and somehow that's kind of, you know, on and off hitting this roadblock to Saturn in the 3rd house, like I mentioned. So you know, for some of you, I can see this being like health matters on and off, kind of in conflict with like your daily rituals, in conflict with your ideologies, in conflict with or causing some kind of difficulties in the realm of siblings, community, short distance travel, even, you know, school, these kinds of things. So, I mean, you can apply this to what's going on in your own life if you're a Sagittarius rising in particular, and you get a sense of what's going on here, you know, and just know that we're hitting this trigger point again. So whatever got off the ground at the Leo new moon a couple of weeks ago on the 28th of July, maybe reaching some sort of a turning point here, and or whatever got off the ground or was conceived of at the Aquarius new moon back in February of 2022, early February, you're reaching a point of something coming to light, bearing fruit, that sort of thing as well. Okay, so that's for you, Sag. I'm going to move on to Scorpio now. Scorpio, for you, you've got the full moon culminating in your 4th house of home, family, roots, place of living, real estate, parents, emotional security. and it's conjunct Saturn. So there may be some somberness, some need for mastery, for maturity, some obstacles, that kind of thing going on here in this fourth house. Opposite the 10th house, which is your public life, your worldly ambitions, the legacy you wish to leave, your career, authority figures, this kind of thing. This is the axis of parenting. It's the axis of the private life and the public life, of work matters, career matters, and home matters, that sort of thing. So there's tension going on here, at the time of this full moon. And, but it's not a new story for you, right? This is something that's been going on for a while now. And then you've got Uranus in Taurus in your 7th house. So on and off with the impulse for rebellion, liberation, breakthrough, freedom, surprises happening in this area of the chart, and that are kind of running into the boundary of Saturn in some way, in the 4th house, which I just mentioned. But for you, the Uranus in the 7th house piece are those Uranian impulses in terms of relationship, in terms of significant others in your life, whether that be like an actual, marriage partner or significant other, or business associates, even kids, like close family members. These are sort of important relationships in your life, is 7th house. Contracts and agreements can fall here. Rivals can fall here in the 7th house. So, there's this story playing out, and between relationships, home, family life, real estate, emotional security, and in some ways that, in this case right now, that 10th house career matters, public life piece is being brought into the story. So what does that look like for you, Scorpio rising, right? Think about your own life. Think about what got off the ground a couple weeks ago at the Leo new moon on July 28th. What's coming to pass now in relation to that? And moreover, think back to the Aquarius new moon, which happened February 1st in the same area of the chart for you in the 4th house. What did you get the first taste of, the first inklings of? What was happening then that is now reaching a crescendo, right, in the 4th house? So I'm going to leave that there, Scorpio. I'm going to move it on to Libra. Libra, you've got the full moon culminating in your 5th house. Just need to take a quick sip of my sparkling water. A culmination being reached in relation to children, in relation to pleasure pursuits, in relation to your creative self-expression, anything you do in life for fun, hobbies, special interests, sports, potentially even. These kinds of things, right? Our 5th house matters. And it can feel a little more serious because you've got Saturn there, or like you're needing to take more responsibility for something in this area of life. And there's a connection between what's going on here for you as an individual and perhaps what's going on in terms of the group, because you've got the Sun in Leo in your 11th house across from the 5th house of the group, of benefactors, of supporters and allies, your vision for the future, potentially sometimes of, your kids' friends. I've seen this many times, so I like to mention it. So if that's pertinent to you. So there's this the individual versus the group kind of energy going on here. And then you've got Uranus playing tricks in your 8th house. So Uranus, the energy of surprise, liberation, freedom seeking, innovation, shock and awe, these kinds of things happening in your 8th house. This has been there for a while. This is not a new story, like we said, but we're reaching this point again where there's like another trigger happening here. And that has to do with other people's resources. Could be your partner's money, could be issues around taxes, insurance, debt, loans, wills, that sort of thing. Could be issues around intimate connections, things where you feel like you're not in control in life, psychological wounds could factor in here. Issues around, death, rebirth, transformation, if you will. So there could be surprises there, and or just a real urge for freedom or liberation there, right? But then it's being met with this stern hand of Saturn in your 5th house. Or like Saturn could be saying, maybe, I don't know, what scenario could this be? You get a big tax return, 8th house. Surprise, Uranus. Saturn in the 5th house says you don't have time to go on a vacation right now, or you need to spend that money on something for your kids. Like these are just some practical things. And of course, that's not going to pertain to everybody, but just gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. So, okay, Libra, I'm going to leave that for you. Listen to the intro as always. And I'm going to move on to Virgo, where Virgo, this full moon is culminating in the 6th house of work, sacrifice, service, your daily grind, health and wellness, pets. So something was initiated around the full moon or the new moon in Leo on July 28th, and even maybe on a grander scale at the new moon in Aquarius, February 1st of this year. That's reaching a culmination, a crescendo, a turning point, an illumination. Something's coming to pass, and it's requiring you to be somewhat mature, responsible, do hard, work. It could be met with some obstacles and some resistance in some way because Saturn is conjunct the full moon. But Saturn rewards us when we do the work. So we have that to hold on to, Then this is on the axis of the 6th, 12th house, because you've got the sun in the 12th house in Leo across the sky, which is where we retreat from the world. It's isolation and solitude. It can be things we're not aware of, our blind spots, secrets, our bad habits that can cause us to self-sabotage. Even places, this can involve places that have to do with like institutions like hospitals, hospices, rehab facilities, spiritual retreat centers, prisons, detention centers, anything like that, right? Can be implicated here as well in the 12th house. Something's going on this axis. It's a full moon moment. And there is this ongoing, impulse from Uranus in the 9th house, breakthroughs, liberation, search for, freedom seeking, surprises, innovation in terms of 9th house themes, which are expanding your horizons, which are foreign people and places, your worldview, your philosophy, the quest you're on in life, politics, religion, justice, all of these themes, teaching, higher education. So, this energy is playing out, continuing to play out, let's say, because it's not a new story, but there is, the Saturn-Uranus story is not a new story, but there is a trigger point here. And we may get some sense at this time that the work that we are doing right now, although it may be difficult, challenging, requiring us to master something, be responsible and mature, ultimately it will free us up in some way in the long run, right? So, and it may have like meaning for us in some way. So, always more I could say, but I'm going to leave that there, Virgo, and you can have a think about what's going on in your own life and how this pertains, and definitely listen to the introduction. Okay, Leo, you're next. So Leo, for you, as one of the fixed signs, you've been feeling all this energy, right? And for you, the full moon's culminating in your 7th house of close personal relationships. So this can be something going on in the life of a partner. Or it can be like anything involving a relationship that you have in your life with, this can even be business partners, any significant others in your life, some kind of contract and agreement situation, something going on with rivals potentially. And there's a full moon moment, a culmination, a blossoming, a turning point in that arena. And it may feel like sobering, or it may feel like hard work, is being done. Or there's an element of mastery or maturity or responsibility, all those Saturnian words, right? Because Saturn's in your 7th house, conjunct the full moon. Maybe there's something going on in your partner's life where they are taking more responsibility, having to be more kind of mature or master something. Could be something like that. And there is an element of relationship in general going on here because the sun is across the sky in your 1st house of self, right? So you and the other significant people or person in your life. And think about what was initiated back in not only a couple of weeks ago at the Leo new moon, so the new moon in your sign, Leo, and is coming to like a precipice now, or turning point. But also if you think back to the February 1st new moon in Aquarius and what got off the ground there, what did you get the first inklings of? What began there in relation to, partnerships, significant other, that kind of thing, that is now, again, reaching this culmination point. And of course, the ongoing story of the Saturn-Uranus square is being triggered again at this full moon. So for you, that means Uranus in your 10th house, who's been shaking things up, rattling your cage, bringing the shock and awe, seeking freedom and liberation and innovation in relation to your career, to your public life, your public, reputation and such, your relationship to authority figures, your own authority, the legacy you wish to leave, right? This kind of thing. So there's an impulse for breaking free there. And then there's also this, it keeps hitting this wall in Saturn in the 7th house of relationship. And so there's like this, kind of, again, like expansion, contraction energy going on in some ways between those two areas of the chart. So for you, excuse me, it could be like, there's something you really want to do in relation to your career, but there's an obstacle in your path that has to do with relationship that's requiring a lot of patience and determination and this kind of thing. That's just one way this could play out. So I'm going to leave that for you, Leo. I'm going to move on to Cancer now. Cancer, for you, we've got the full moon culminating in your 8th house, which is the house of other people's resources, other people's money, time, energy. It's the house that deals with the things in life that we feel are not within our control. Therefore, what transpires can feel we can be a bit obsessed with it, or a bit fearful. There can be things in a practical sense, like matters around taxes, debt, loans, bursaries, scholarships, inheritance, wills, partner's income, intimacy issues, like, and I don't just mean that in like, in a sexual way. It could be like psychological intimacy. It could speak to psychological wounding, these sorts of things. The 8th house is deals with the darker side of life often, the skeletons in the closet and things like that. So this is ultimately on the axis of resources, because you've got the full moon conjunct Saturn in the 8th house. That could be a sobering moment of like, oh my gosh, I owe a lot more in taxes than I thought I did. Or I have incurred a lot more debt than I realized. Or I thought that insurance was going to come through and it didn't. Or it could be just like a lot of hard work in terms of investments and things like that have been going on. But so that's other people's money. And then, the other themes I mentioned, then across the sky, you have the sun in the 2nd house of your resources, your personal finances and time and energy, what you value and place worth on, material possessions, basic needs, that kind of thing, your sense of self-worth. And so, there's an illuminating moment around these themes at this full moon that was initiated around the time of the new moon in Leo a couple of weeks ago, July 28th, but in a grander scale, more something that was conceived of, or you got the first notion of back in very early February at the time of the Aquarius new moon, now coming to pass in some way, right? And of course, there is the square to Uranus. That's been an ongoing story and hitting another trigger point at this time. And so for you, that's been the shock and awe factor, the need for liberation, rebellion, the surprises, the innovations, this sort of thing in relation to 11th house themes of friends, the group in some way, collaborations, even, allies and supporters, and your hopes and dreams for the future in some way in the 11th house, right? So again, there's something here going on that is somehow like one of the things that comes to mind when I think about this scenario, full moon in the 8th house opposite, the sun in the 2nd, square Uranus in the 11th, mixing friends and money, collaborations that involve money, something that has to do with allies and supporters and resources in some way, like maybe like investors or people that are I don't know, somehow making donations or something like that, right? So that's the kind of thing that you can see coming to a head right around now, or culmination or a release point of some description. Okay, so definitely listen to the intro, Cancer. And I'm going to move on to Gemini now, where Gemini, you have the full moon culminating in your 9th house of higher learning, foreign people and places, your ideologies and philosophy, the adventure that you seek, the quest you're on, publishing, higher education. I don't know if I said that already. Justice, politics, religion. These are all 9th house matters. Travel, if I didn't say that. So there is a point being reached here where, something's culminating that was initially conceived of back at the new moon in Leo a couple of weeks ago, around July 28th. But maybe even more so around the new moon in Aquarius, February 1st, around that time. Think about what was getting off the ground, what was being conceived of back then, that's reaching this turning point, this moment of realization, illumination, what have you, right? And it's directly related to those 9th house themes, but also involves 3rd house themes of that which is close to home. Your daily rituals that are meaningful to you, all the things you do on the day-to-day and the people that you encounter, right? So it can be about things like siblings, cousins, neighbors, friends who feel like siblings, community members, education, sort of anything involving communications, commerce, marketing. I'm sure I missed something there, but those are the general themes that can also play a role in this full moon. And then, of course, we have the ongoing story of Saturn-Uranus square, which is reaching a trigger point again, and at this full moon. And for you, that Uranus piece has been shaking things up, been offering up some surprises, the impulse for change, liberation, freedom, shock and awe moments that have to do with the things that go on behind closed doors, blind spots, secrets, anything involving, the like retreat, solitude, isolation. This can even be, on a practical sense, things that involve institutions like hospitals, long-term care facilities, rehab facilities, anything along those lines, spiritual retreat centers, anything along those lines can be implicated here. Your spiritual life, your unconscious patterns, these sorts of things. So there's, a need for like sort of a breaking free or breakthroughs, an impulse for breakthrough there. And then, there's this constant kind of butting up against what's going on with Saturn in your ninth house that I just spoke about. So there can be a real call for mastery, for maturity, for responsibility, issues that feel a little more serious in these realms of life can come to a head now. So that's for you, Gemini. I'm going to move on to Taurus now, where we've got your full moon, or the full moon in Aquarius, culminating in your 10th house. Career, public life, authority figures, the legacy you wish to leave, your worldly ambitions, something culminating here. And it can feel serious. It can feel restrictive. It can feel like you're taking on more responsibility, like you have to mature in some way, like you have to master something, that this has been going on in this area of life, because the moon is conjunct Saturn. And then you've got the other piece, the other end of the other side of the coin, if you will, is the sun in your 4th house, which is where Leo is. And that's the sun there opposite the moon in your 10th. So issues around home, family, roots, place of living, emotional security versus material security, parenting, these kinds of things, can come up right now. And we also have, as no doubt Uranus in your sign, Taurus. So, there has been this story playing out, and we're reaching another trigger point here where Uranus is rattling your cage, and it's very personal because it's in your 1st house. So this can be an urge for freedom, rebellion, shock and awe moments, change, innovation, all centered around you and how you steer your ship through life, your life's trajectory, also your physicality, your physical health, your appearance even, how you are perceived by the world or how you come at the world, in general. So there can be this real impulse for you to do things differently, but you're running up against these obstacles and this need for maturity and such when it comes to, your public life, your career ambitions, these sorts of things, like I mentioned. So for you, always more to say, of course, Taurus, but listen to the intro and take what I said and filter that through the lens of your own life experience and what's going on for you right now. What got off the ground at the Leo new moon a couple of weeks ago that's culminating now in some way, but also what got off the ground or what was conceived of at the Aquarius new moon back in very early February. And how is that reaching a point of culmination or illumination, a turning point in some way now at this full moon in Aquarius? Okay. Moving on to Aries. Aries, for you, you have the full moon culminating in your 11th house. So you're reaching a full moon moment in relation to the group, friends, collaborators, allies and supporters, networks, your vision for the future in some way is being illuminated here, right? Reaching a point, a turning point, a point of release, of bearing fruit, it could be quite emotional even when we're talking about a full moon. And the moon is, butting up against Saturn. So there can be an element here of a call for maturity, of taking responsibility, of mastery, of some cold, hard situation that needs to be dealt with in that 11th house realm. But you also have an element of what's going on in the 5th house playing a role here, because the sun is in Leo across the sky from the moon, right? And Leo's your 5th house of children, pleasure pursuits, your individual contributions or creative self-expression, hobbies, special interests, that kind of thing, right? Are facing off with this full moon. And then, excuse me, the ongoing story of Uranus in Taurus in your 2nd house in square with Saturn in your 11th house. So you've got Uranus rattling the cage in your 2nd house of your personal resources, your money, finances, your time, your energy, what you value, your survival needs, your sense of self-worth, right? So things transpiring here, there can be shock and awe moments, a lot of radical ups and downs and breakthroughs and insights and innovations, surprises, all of those Uranian words, a real need to break free. But then there's this, obstacle course that we've been having to run with Saturn in Aquarius. And for you, that's your 11th house that I just spoke to. So, these are areas of life are what are being called into attention or calling for your attention right now, Aries, at the time of this full moon in Aquarius. And so, filter that through the lens of what's going on in your own life and how that applies, right? And include what I spoke about in the introduction. So, okay, Aries, I'm going to leave that for you, and I'm going to move to last but not least in this scenario. We've got Pisces. So Pisces, for you, this full moon in Aquarius is culminating in your 12th house. So there's something going on here that is reaching a turning point, something being illuminated, something coming to pass. It could be emotional in some ways, because we are talking about a full moon. And it's in the realm of what goes on behind closed doors, something involving retreat, isolation, solitude, even institutions that keep us away from, the daily grind. So there may be something involving hospitals, long-term care facilities, spiritual retreat centers, even vacation falls into this category. Anything you do to retreat from the daily grind in some way, for better or worse, So those things can factor in. The 12th house can be like our blind spots, our self-sabotaging behaviors in some way can be implicated here. So something's reaching this culmination or turning point that involves one of those 12th house themes. And it can feel stern, sobering. So there could be something to do with aging going on here, I feel like, in the 12th house with Saturn conjunct the full moon. There can be something to do with taking more responsibility and maturity being required of you in relation to one of those themes. And then this is opposite the sun in Leo in your 6th house of your daily grind, sacrifice, the work you do on the day-to-day, paid or unpaid work, health, issues around health and illness, even pets if that pertains to you. So this is a full moon moment, and it's in relation to whatever transpired at the new moon in Leo a couple of weeks ago. Something's reaching like a leveling up or an illumination point. And then over and above that, if you think back to the new moon in Aquarius that happened on February 1st, around that time, what were you getting the first inkling of? What was transpiring then that is now reaching again, a full moon moment, right? And of course, we have to talk about Uranus, the ongoing story with Uranus and Taurus, which for you is the 3rd house, in square to Saturn in the 12th house that I was just talking about. So for you, the shock and awe, the disruptions, the destabilization, the call for liberation and rebellion and what have you is all happening in your 3rd house of the rituals you do on the day-to-day, right? That are meaningful to you in some way, that are involve things like the people you surround yourself with or communicate with on the day-to-day. Siblings, cousins, neighbors, your community, people who feel like siblings, issues around communication, around short travel, around education and schooling, around commerce and marketing, potentially even in the 3rd house here. So there's been a lot of disruption going on in those realms, right? One or more of those themes has been impacted by this Uranian impulse, and it's like running up against these obstacles that are happening in the 12th house, like I was talking about. So we're reaching a moment here where we may have, a trigger point again, where there's a disruption that needs to be tended to in some way, or we're getting a sense of the hard work that we've been required to do or are being required to do, and what that means for our daily rituals and things like that those 3rd house themes, right? Okay, so I think enough said for all 12 signs. Was it shorter? It's never shorter. I don't know why I even bother saying that. But here we are at almost an hour and a half. I hope this brings you some insight and some validation in terms of what's going on for you. Please leave me a comment. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It's taking extra effort for me to do this right now because I don't have a lot of time or space or anything. So I really appreciate your help with growing the channel and letting me know that I'm not doing this just for, like for naught kind of thing, right? So please leave me a comment, like, subscribe, and I will, fingers crossed, catch you for the next video in a couple weeks' time, which will be the new moon in Virgo that's happening on, I believe, the 27th of August. All right. So bye for now. Take good care.